Welcome back everyone to another Maya rigging tutorial. I'm Jason Baskin, and in this video I'm going to describe the process for creating an FK-IK arm setup, a setup that can use each of these different modes and seamlessly switch between them. I've already created a YouTube video describing the process for building an IK arm, so this setup is exactly like the one in my other video. And I've also created a couple videos describing the process for creating FK controls like I'm using here for the FK arm setup. The only difference for this setup is that I'm actually controlling the FK joints using parent and scale constraints rather than direct connections through the connection editor. I've also added a FK forearm joint just like the one I have for my IK forearm, and this is being driven by an expression which can be seen here in the expression editor, but it's essentially the same expression I use for the IK arm setup. Alright, so you've probably figured out already that in order to have an arm that can act in both FK and IK modes, we actually need to build three arm setups: an FK arm, an IK arm, and a bound arm. The bound arm is the one that's actually going to be bound to the mesh and control the deformation of the geometry. I should also mention that the joints and their orientations for all three arm setups need to be absolutely identical. I've separated them by adjusting the controls for display purposes, but if I zero them back out, you'll see that all three of these joint chains lie exactly on top of one another. So to control this bound arm, what we're going to do is create some orient constraints. I'm going to select the IK bicep, shift select the FK bicep, and finally select the bound bicep and go to Constrain, Orient, making sure that the Maintain Offset option is turned off. When I hit Apply, we should see the bound shoulder rotate to a position that's exactly between the IK and the FK arm. And if I modify the controls, you'll see that it maintains that mid-rotation position. So this joint is now being influenced by both the FK and the IK joint chains. I'm going to do the same thing with the elbow, first selecting the IK elbow, then the FK elbow, and finally the bound elbow, and again going to Constrain Orient. I'll do this with the forearm, choosing the IK forearm first, the FK forearm second, and the bound forearm third, and choosing Constrain Orient. And then I'll repeat this process for the wrist, choosing the IK wrist first, the FK wrist second, and the bound wrist third, and choosing Constrain Orient. If we take a look at our channel box, we'll see that each of the bound joints now has an orient constraint, and within that orient constraint we'll see two incoming values, the IK value and the FK value. So switching between these two constraints is simply a matter of setting one of the values to 0 while leaving the other set to 1. And if I do this for all of the bound arm joints, we'll see that the bound arm will rotate into position for one of the active modes, in this case the FK mode. But going into the channel box, identifying the orient constraint, and modifying these values manually would be really tedious. So I'm going to consolidate access to these different attributes by simply creating some custom attributes on a controller. I've created an FK-IK controller here, and I'll create those attributes by going to the attribute editor, hitting Control A, and choosing Attributes, Add Attributes. And I'm going to make one attribute to control the FK values and one attribute to control the IK constraint values. So I'll type in FK, give it a minimum value of 0 and a maximum value of 1, and click Add. And then I'll type in IK and also give it a minimum value of 0 and a maximum value of 1, and click Add again. I'll close the Add Attribute window and go back to the channel box, and now I can create direct connections from these attributes to the constraint attributes which are associated with all of my bound arm joints. So I'll do that by bringing up my outliner and then bringing up the connection editor. I'll go to Window, General Editors, Connection Editor, and I will load the FK-IK control here on the left. And you can see I only have the readable attribute showing so that this viewport isn't too cluttered. And then I need to find the bound joints, which are part of my skeleton group, and then locate the orient constraints I've associated with those bound joints. So here I have an orient constraint for the hand. I'll load it on the right and simply connect FK to the FK attribute, IK to the IK attribute. I'll repeat this process for all of my constraints, again connecting IK to IK and FK to FK. And once these connections have been made, I can switch modes by going to my hand control and setting the FK value to 1 and the IK value to 0, or by setting the FK value to 0 and the IK value to 1. But I'd like to make this even a little bit simpler for the animator so that they don't have to modify two channels just to make a switch. And to do this, we'll just add a really simple expression. I'll go back to Window Animation Editor's Expression Editor, and I'll write a new expression that will create a complementary relationship between these two attributes so that their combined values will always only add up to 1. So when one attribute is set to a value of 1, the other will be pushed down to a value of 0, and so on. This is a really simple expression, and the idea behind it is simply that the FK attribute is going to be equal to 1 minus the IK attribute. So the proper syntax for an expression is to end each line with a semicolon and to call out an attribute by specifying object name followed by a period followed by the attribute name. So left hand FKIK control FK is equal to 1 minus left hand FKIK control dot IK. And when writing expressions or mel script, it's crucial, of course, that you get the names of the objects and attributes exactly right. So I'll click Create, and if I get white text on black listing the name of the expression, I know I got it correct. If this shows up red, it means I probably had a typo. And I'll rename this FKIK expression and close the expression editor. And now you'll see that one of my attributes, the FK attribute, is being driven automatically by the IK value. So since that attribute is now automatically driven, I can actually select the FK attribute and hide it by just right-clicking and choosing Hide Selected. And now the animator has one simple attribute that allows them to switch between FK and IK modes. So this setup can be handled in a number of different ways besides using Orient Constraints, but giving animators access to FK and IK modes, especially for the arms, is pretty crucial for any character. So I hope you found this video helpful, and if you're interested in seeing more of my rigging tutorials, check out my other videos on YouTube or my courses on lynda.com. Thanks for watching.